Welcome to the Authentically Rachel podcast, where I, Rachel, have authentic conversations that demonstrate the reality of God's sovereignty and grace in our lives. In 2011, I was in a horrific car accident that left me with a traumatic brain injury and an internal decapitation. After years of rehab and God's prompting, I started this podcast and am taking these conversations visual. So check them out on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even my website, authentically-rachel.com. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can know when the next conversation comes out. So join me, and together we will learn how total submission to God can carry us through the darkest of times. Rachel Peterson has a life story worthy of a Hollywood movie. It's one of incredible brokenness and hurt. Full disclosure, I've known Rachel most of my life. We grew up, our parents are very good friends, even to this day. I've always known her to be a strong, independent woman, but I have not fully known her story until now. God has done a tremendous work in Rachel's life, and I'm so happy she reached out to share her story the authentically Rachel way. So, welcome to the podcast, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
So good to have you.
Good to be here.
So, first, I want to get into what your childhood was like.
Oof. You know, there's kind of, I segment my childhood into kind of pre-adoption and post-adoption days. So I was adopted when I was in first grade. But before that, I lived in pretty extreme poverty. I was raised by two drug addicts who had a broken marriage. And my mom was a really young teen mom. She had 3 kids by the time she was 18. And we were in and out of shelters. We were in and out of apartments. You know, I can remember briefly living in our car, you know. So it was full of extreme abuse, sexual, physical, emotional. But then there were also times when, you know, I had really awesome foster families. You know, God gave us angels throughout our time. And, you know, I'll say that I have some happy memories, you know, but then I was adopted into a pretty remarkable family. And, you know, it went from being my sister and my brother and myself to, you know, a family of 7, which, you know, you were adopted, or not you were adopted, but your family adopted.
Right?
Two, right?
No, all of my siblings are adopted, every one of them.
I think I knew that on some level, but for some reason I was thinking of your older sisters.
Well, I look like my brothers.
You do?
But I don't look like my sisters or my oldest brother, but I look like the younger brothers.
A little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe your thoughts of what it was like that you were going to be adopted?
You know, I think at that age, I didn't quite understand what it meant as far as like the totality of it all. You know, like if this is final, there's really going to be stability. It's funny. The biggest question that I had was, can I change the spelling of my name? Because I didn't like how it was spelled phonetically.
Was it A-E-L?
It was E-A-L. And I was learning how to read at the time.
No,
right?
No. And Rachel spelled the correct way.
Exactly.
It must be spelled.
Exactly. And so I said, I will take Beutel any day, but don't make me be Rachel anymore.
That's awesome. I remember during when we adopted one of my older sisters, Jessie,
Mm.
they asked if I were to change my name, and I was like, no, I'll keep Rachel spelled the correct
Yes,
way.
it matters. Okay, it matters.
What was your experience meeting your adoptive family?
So it's actually a really cool story.
Ooh, I can't wait.
So, and I didn't understand the whole story up until even a few weeks ago because my parents sent out something for us. But from my side, we were in foster care out in Iowa, and we were visiting my foster mom's sister in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and it was my birthday because my birthday is 2 days after Christmas. And the Beutels had come over with like just some Christmas treats or something, uh, and I, I got to meet them very briefly. I don't really recall a whole lot of it, but apparently, when my parents went home, my dad heard an audible voice of God telling him to adopt us. And it turns out that they then had to kind of fight for us for the next year and a half to stop other adoptions. They were going to be splitting up my siblings and I.
Oh,
And so my parents, crammed a 2-year process into, a few months to begin the whole getting us out of Iowa into Colorado. But I mean, it was crazy on my parents' side. Um, my husband can attest to this. My dad sent us this story, and he and my mom were set to go to a Christmas party, and the house collapsed, and my parents were lost, and so they weren't there in time. Um, and because of that, like they were able to, I guess, like kind of complete all of the paperwork, everything that was necessary. But had they been in the house, they would have missed the opportunity to fly out to get the lawyers everything ready in time to stop the other adoption.
whoa,
I know, isn't that crazy?
whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah, God is so good.
Were you gonna get adopted separately,
I think
or?
that was the plan. I think my sister and I, they were going to try to keep us together. But
Mm-hmm.
my little brother, because he was a baby, he was a lot more adoptable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's my recollection. I'm not 100% certain.
Right.
I knew that we were in different foster homes at the time.
Huh. So, like I said, I have two sisters who were adopted from an orphanage in the Philippines. One sister adopted from foster care, and that they were adopted all as teens, and that transition was rough. So, in your opinion, what was that transition like being adopted into a family of comparative affluence?
I think that is probably one of the hardest questions to answer because as a child, you don't really understand affluence. You don't really understand the haves and the have nots until all of a sudden you see it, right? And, to be adopted into a family, where we're going to the country club and we have a pool inside of our home. Um,
That was the best.
I know it was such a fun house. But it was really different. I coming from foster care and coming from a place where, you know, my sister and my mom would disappear for days at a time, and my sister and I would have one can of ravioli to split between us. My sister was only a year older than I was, and she was basically my mom. Um, to then being adopted, right? And I still had food scarcity issues. So I was, stealing food from my parents all the time. I'd sneak out in the middle of the night and hoard food. Um, I had a really difficult time adjusting socially because I had such bad reactive attachment issues. And it really caused some, just extreme behaviors. I think any abused kid has signs, and mine were everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So, would you say it was kind of like a whole new world just kind of opened up,
Yeah.
and you were safe in this place of love and um, care that you never had before. And that security, you didn't really know how to deal with that as a
Yeah.
kid.
Well, I think you phrased that perfectly, that there was security, but I didn't know how to deal with it. I think I can remember, and this is just kind of a tangible example, but when I was given my own room for the first time, instead of sleeping on my bed, I would sleep in between the wall and the mattress right above the heater
Really?
because I needed to be in a small confined
Mm.
space. Or I would sleep in the closet. And that wasn't all the time, but it was just, during the times of really extreme duress, I think. Um, and anyone who knows anything about reactive attachment disorder understands that you can't anticipate what's going to trigger it. And so, um, having the constant security almost felt suffocating, and being a child who didn't have the words yet to explain to my parents what I was feeling, what emotions I was having. I didn't understand them myself, much less be able to convey them to the people that are supposed to be taking care of me. And there's this thing, it's called secondary trauma, and it's when people react to trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
it can be re-traumatizing.
Yeah.
And I think there was a little bit of that happened, with everybody in our family, because it wasn't just my parents, it was my siblings. I had a brother and a sister who all of a sudden were older siblings to a lot of dysfunction, and it caused a lot of upheaval.
Yeah. Yeah. God bless your parents, and
Amen.
you learned about Jesus and his love for you from your adopted
Hmm.
Christian parents. How'd you respond to that? And did you have a personal relationship with Jesus at the time?
In the beginning, I don't know that I was responding to Christ's love through them or just their love for me. Um, but it was tangible and I could see that they were different. Um, I will say that I did have a personal relationship with Jesus when I was younger, because it made sense to me,
Mm-hmm.
um, that I could be chosen and loved on a very small level. But as I grew older, there became a real wrestling that began to occur in my teen years, that didn't just draw me away from Christ. I'm agnostic at best, atheist, you know, probably is the most accurate description.
So, what were you? Tell me about your teenage years.
Ooh.
Because
um,
we didn't really hang
no,
out all that much from
no, your
your.
family moved away for a little while.
Yeah, we went, we were so far out in the country
Yep.
that hanging around my parents' friends just was an hour, 2 hour
Right,
drive.
right.
So,
Well, and it was different. It was pretty extreme. I'd say I had an extreme teenage livelihood. I was the kid, I was hurt and I was desperate to kind of numb that hurt. And so whether that was through sex, whether it was through drugs, or even the extreme, working on my schoolwork. I graduated high school 2.5 years early, after being in and out of these reform schools that I continued to have to be sent to. Um,
what was
and
that like?
I had two very different experiences, um, in two different locations. The first one that I went to was called the Holy Highway. Um, and I was there from the last half of junior high to the beginning part of high school. And it was really destructive place for me to be. It
Mm.
was, filled with other troubled teens that were addicts, that were dealing with their emotional problems. But then you kind of layer on the religious abuse that was occurring with it. And, it was really, really toxic, and it was kind of scary, in some instances. But on the other hand, I went to the school that I graduated from, and it was called Shelterwood. And at the time, it was in Denver. I think it's been moved to Kansas or Missouri now. But that was maybe the first time that I experienced what it meant to have Christian love from a friendship.
Mm.
Because there, instead of us living in dorms, kind of watching ourselves and each other, which is how Holy Highway is laid out. Shelterwood, they pair you with, they called it an older girl or an older sister. Um, and they were college graduates that were going into ministry. And so for the first time, I was having adult ish like relationships and friendships with people that could exhibit Christ's love for me.
Right, right. Friendships are so important. I think even to females,
Yeah.
especially, just how impactful friendships are in
Yeah.
showing Christ's love to each other.
Well, and we're meant to God created us to live in community with one
Mm-hmm.
another. And especially when you're a teen and you're so kind of what's the word? Um oh gosh.
Connected.
Yeah, I would say connected to your friends, kind of when you look to them more than you do your family, you're looking to them for approval, you're looking to them for advice, you're looking to them for how to react to things. So it really matters. Who you surround yourself with matters.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Agreed. So, have you had any communication with your birth mom since your adoption?
No. So, well, briefly, between the time that I was adopted until I was 17 or 18, there was nothing. I wasn't allowed to because I had what is called a closed adoption.
Mm.
My mom had kidnapped my siblings and I when we were living in Iowa. So after that, we were taken out of state and we weren't
What was
allowed.
that like?
I don't have a ton of memories of it. I remember being put into the back of a U-Haul,
Mm.
and then I just remember darkness. Um, so I don't really recall anything scary or terrifying happening outside of the normal abuse that we were already kind of enduring. Um, but finding her when I was 18, it was really different because it it took a lot just to find her in the first place. This was kind of pre Google, pre, internet age. And I was able to locate her through just doing research. And then finding out that she had been arrested. I found the prison that she was at. And I was able to find out who her counselor was. And so I was able to get in communication with her that way while she was still in prison. And so at the time, she was sober. And I had a ton of hope for what our relationship was going to be.
Mm.
But her life was cut short before that ever came to fruition.
Can you describe a little bit about what happened to your birth mom?
Yeah. So my mom was an addict, and she stole, I think it was less than $10, um, and some jewelry from uh, this girl named Lisa. And she was friends with her dad. I think they were dating, maybe. I'm not really sure on the dynamic there. Um, and, addicts aren't known for their rationality, right?
Why
And I
not?
know, crazy. And so what ended up happening was they paid one of my mom's friends money to deliver her to them, and then the four of them attacked her. and she was stabbed some 20 odd times.
Was this in prison
No,
or?
this was, she'd been out of prison for about a year and a half.
Okay.
You know what? Scratch that. It must have been about 2.5 years.
Okay.
Because she was in prison for about a year when I found her, and then just a
How'd
few years
you
later.
find that out?
So it was really pretty awful. It was my 21st or my 22nd birthday. I want to say my 22nd. Um, and my mom called me thinking it was Christmas, and I went off the rails. Just 20 years of anger and frustration came out because she was very clearly high. She didn't know what day it was. She had that really rapid speech, that meth addicts get. Um, and I said some of the most hateful things I could have imagined. And I said I never wanted to speak with her again.
Because that's not
Yeah,
you.
and that's not me, but it was the hurt that was just coming out. And she was killed 2 weeks later, and I had no idea. I didn't find out until the 4th of July. I was doing kind of my biannual check-in on her, and I couldn't reach her through any of her phone numbers. I couldn't reach her through the emails. And just out of nowhere, I was like, well, I'm going to check Facebook. I didn't even know she had a Facebook. But I did, and that's where I found out. And it was really hard because it was back in the day before all of the Facebook ads. So all of my friends could see me finding out. Do you know back when like you would post on someone's wall and it would be plastered on everybody's, daily feed? So, while I'm finding out that my mom was murdered, I'm finding out all this other stuff. And people are communicating with me online for the entire world to see. It was pretty traumatizing.
No bueno.
Yeah, for real.
Yikes. So, another part of your story is you had a very powerful and professional job, but due to health complications, and we'll get to that in the next episode, you had to give it all up. How did that make you feel?
Oh man, I mean, humbling isn't even the strong enough word. I don't know that there is a word for it. It was devastating. I had spent my entire life kind of creating this shell of who I wanted to be, or at least of who I wanted to convey that I was. And as long as I was able to give off this certain image or have these certain safeguards and securities in my life, then no one could touch me. And that I was good enough as long as I was meeting this criteria and these parameters. And when I gave it all up, it was as though I was losing my identity. It wasn't just losing my physical capability at the same time. It was losing my autonomy. It was losing my financial security, losing, you've had a traumatic brain injury, so you know what I mean when I say that, the meds that I was on, the seizures that I was having, the aphasia that I was getting, I couldn't function. It really, at the time, it felt like it was stealing my life away from me.
Yeah. God really does. You hit rock bottom for God to show his grace and his love.
Well, you look at the story of Joseph, right? He was sold into slavery before he could become a king.
That's right. And the woman at the well, she was trying to get away from all the people meeting. She went to the well in the middle of the day when no one did, and she, was trying to go
escape.
undercover and trying to, shield herself.
Shame is a powerful tool.
But there was Jesus, and he was right there, and he knew exactly what she had been through and what she needed.
and that he would name them too, that he could name her life experiences and that he could name her.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's powerful.
It's so powerful. God, I say this time and time again, God knows you intimately, and He loves you intimately. And just recognizing that and knowing that, it's so comforting.
Well,
Because you
it
don't
changes.
have to put a shield on. You
Yeah.
don't have to be, you can be authentic.
Yeah.
That's why I call it authentically Rachel, because, in Christ, we can be authentic. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need to have a shield.
Well, and the reality is he doesn't give us that choice,
Mm,
right? He sees our innermost thoughts. He knows our hearts. We don't have the option to hide anymore.
no, no, we don't. And it sounds exactly like what you're going through. You're trying to find your purpose, your sense of
Mm.
self
Yeah.
in your job, in the people you hung out with, in the circumstances you were surrounding yourself with, and then boom, you find out your birth mom passed. That was ripped, that idea of stability for once in your life. Not saying adoption isn't stability, but that connection. Um your job security, financial, that was all ripped away.
Yeah. Well, and it it's funny because I made my job and my professional identity so important to me. Like I remember throwing a party when I first got my $100,000 salary. That was, when I broke that barrier, that was such a big deal to me that you would have thought I'd won the Olympics.
Hmm.
I literally threw a party because I not that I invited a bunch of people, I had my parents over to have a glass of champagne, but it was one of those things that I thought that's what mattered. I thought that's what would make my parents love me more too.
Because of that dichotomy
Right.
of comparative affluence,
Mm-hmm.
trying to find love in
Well, and trying to be worthy.
where exactly.
Yep.
Wow. So you told me that you went and forgave the woman convicted of murdering your mom. How did that all come about and what was that like?
Ooh, so that was a decade long journey. Um, the fact that there were ultimately 5 people charged for various things in her murder. Um, 4 of them served less than 5 years and pled out. And Lisa, the woman who was my age at the time, was the only one that pled guilty, and she got 50 years.
Hmm.
And it just blew my mind. Even, this is pre law school, Rachel. Just, my very basic understanding of the legal system and what she could have gotten away with if she had pled out. She probably would have served 15 years and, she would be out by now. But, the fact that she took responsibility always stood out to me. Um, and about 5 years ago, I lost a very dear friend of mine to cancer. She passed away from lung cancer at the age of 30. She might have been 31, but I think she was 30. And one of the last things she said to me, keeping in mind that I'm an atheist, and this wasn't just to me, she kind of gave this as a calling to all of her friends that we were to go out and to love people better, and to love people like Jesus. And I think in the back of her mind, she knew what that meant because so many of us didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus at that time. She knew that it would require us to have to study, to have to really search within as to what that means for our own lives and our own situations. And ultimately, I kept going back to the cross because that was one of the only real stories that I could recall from the Bible. And I remember Jesus looking to the left and forgiving the murderer who was next to him and saying, you'll be with me one day. And I said, okay, tangibly, I can do that. I can, if Jesus can love someone that hard, so can I.
Yeah.
And so I went through, it took me about a year and a half to finally get someone at the Iowa State Prison to communicate back with me. But I eventually found a social worker who was willing to do the restorative justice process with me and with her. And so, first, Mary is the social worker. Mary went to Lisa and asked if she would be interested in doing this. My only requirements were I needed to know that she was sober and that she was willing to actually talk with me. Um, and so we went back and forth through the social worker acting as a mediator for about 3 months. We had the opportunity to share our stories. Well, this is primarily her sharing her story of life before she was arrested. And that really allowed me to see how parallel our lives were. The only difference was that by the grace of God, I was adopted, but she was raised in the exact same environment with two addicts as parents, suffered similar abuse. Um,
Here you were with all the trappings of a successful job, of, you know, all this affluence and these surrounding yourself with the people you wanted to surround yourself with. And sounds like even though you were free, she in prison, because she had accepted Christ, was freer than you and had more confidence and peace.
yeah, that was one of the most startling moments, I would say, of the entire process. When I went to speak with Lisa at the prison, I had initially written a letter so that way my emotions wouldn't kind of impact the words that I was wanting to convey. Um, and so I handed her the letter and I gave her a few minutes to read it. And I came back in and she was crying but they were happy tears. Um, and so we began talking and I kind of devolved. I kind of fell apart and just not out of sadness, but just out of, I think, the extreme emotions that I was having. And I was telling her how broken I felt,
Mm.
that I just had nothing left to kind of keep me going, that I used all of my emotional energy to get to this point, and now I didn't know where I was going. And she told me that when she got sober in prison, she started seeing, she became a Christian through a prison ministry. And that if I ever wanted to have comfort, that I should look to Jesus.
Mm.
And, my adoptive mom was sitting right there with me. And her, she's got a faith that can move mountains,
Yes, she
this
does.
woman. And I just remember seeing her smile. And in my heart, I was like, oh gosh, like I don't know how to break it to her. I don't buy that, And so I just kind of kept my mouth shut. But I just had this ringing in my ears. I could hear her saying that over and over again. If you are ever needing comfort, you can look to Jesus.
Yeah, it's true. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of forgiveness and how that act freed you from a life of bitterness and anger and resentment?
Yeah. I will say that was choosing to forgive Lisa. It didn't happen overnight. It was very much a transformational journey, one leading up to the actual act itself, but then also choosing to live in that forgiveness every day after. and what that means, both for myself, but then also for a relationship with Lisa. Um, and I would be remiss if I said that comfort and freedom came quickly, because it didn't. First, my life completely fell apart. I I got divorced. I my health went downhill. I
Mm-hmm.
started having seizures. I pushed my family away. My only lifeline was my brain at that point, and I just told myself, okay, I'm going to do something that matters. I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to do this, do this, do this. And so, the freedom that comes with forgiveness didn't come until I became a Christian and I learned how to forgive myself along with that. And I think that's where the true freedom lies, and that's truly where grace exists.
Coming out of that agnostic atheist mentality, um, speak to that for a little bit. What truth can you give those who are in that mindset?
Oh man, you know, I look back at all the ways God has kept me safe and all the ways that He's made Himself real to me. Starting, I mean, obviously from when I was a little girl, being, saved by my adoption. But, I attempted suicide when I was 16. I took an entire bottle of pills. My parents took me to the hospital. My mom watched me swallow a bottle of pills.
Mm.
They took me to the hospital and they did a drug test on me, and I had nothing in my system. Nothing. Um, there have been so many times in my life where things like that have happened that are miraculous, where I think that's what kept it in my head just enough that I was like, okay, there's something to this. There's something to this. Um, but it's a choice. Belief is a choice.
Mm.
And diving into your belief and wrestling with it is a choice. And before I found Christ, I really did live by the motto that my parents taught me, which is you wrestle with faith. Um, and and that's what I did. I was exposed to religion again in my later life, by going to CCU. When I decided to go to law school, I needed to go back, um, for my undergrad to get, grades good enough to get me into school. So CCU had a religion requirement. You had to take a certain amount of credits. And by doing so, I had a really firm foundation theologically. Um, and I had a kind of a new level of curiosity, I would say.
The simple fact that it's all God's power and His divineness is all around us. It's in creation, it's in, the simple fact that you didn't have any drugs in
I
your
know.
system. What's up with that?
I know. Well, and I mean, there have been so many different times in my life where God has made Himself so tangibly real, and I ran away still, and yet
Mm.
He didn't stop pursuing me. And we look to Hosea and Gomar in their relationship, and what that represents as the people, right, that run
Mm-hmm.
away from Christ,
Yeah,
and His inability to stop pursuing us, His creation.
yeah, it's true. This has been such a good conversation. Um, I'm so excited to get into the next one. So stay tuned, guys. It's coming. And thank you so much for coming on. It's
My
been
pleasure.
awesome.
I'm really excited to get into the good stuff.
All right.